Viewers, our cover story tonight on Fineprint is from Israel, where it has been nothing less than a showdown today. It all started just 5 days after Benjamin Netanyahu was made the Prime Minister of Israel. On January 4th, he unveiled a plan to overhaul the judiciary. But little did he know back then that this one step will provoke one of Israel's largest protests ever. 3 months on, this is where the country stands. A storm started late last night, just hours after the defense minister criticized the judicial reform and the prime minister fired his senior leader from the post.
האירועים המתרחשים בחברה הישראלית אינם פוסחים על צבא ההגנה לישראל.
The events taking place and the issues in Israeli society do not skip the Israel Defense Forces. Unprecedented feelings of anger, pain and disappointment have risen, and I see the source of our strength eroding. As Minister of Defense of the State of Israel, I emphasize the growing rift in our society is penetrating the IDF and security agencies. This poses a clear, immediate and tangible threat to the security of the state. I will not allow this.
Now, this kind of criticism is not new. Over the past few months, many from the ruling coalition have openly called for a rollback. But this was the first time a senior cabinet member like Yoav Gallant spoke out. And it was not going to settle well with Netanyahu. Only a few expected him to sack his defense minister amid such tumultuous times. But that's exactly what he did. An unprecedented action met with an unprecedented reaction. Scores of people were immediately up in arms across Israel. Major highways were blocked, blue and white Israeli flags filled the streets, and bonfires were lit.
We're here to protest. We feel that we have no other way. We have to speak. We have to show ourselves and say, this is it. Up here. This has to be stopped. This Prime Minister is not qualified anymore.
As dawn broke, protests have only been spiraling. The divide has gotten bitter and more contested. Private organizations are now beginning to choose sides as well. The head of the Histadrut labor union has called for a general strike. Embassies have joined the move as well. Takeoffs from Israel's main airport, Ben Gurion, have been suspended. Crucial seaports, banks, hospitals and medical services also announced a strike. Branches of McDonald's have been shut down indefinitely as it decided to follow suit. As these developments were playing out, the president sent out a strong message. He urged an immediate rollback of the judicial reforms. He called on his fellow colleagues to come to their senses and choose responsibility over politics. Now, as we said, today's showdown has made the divide clearer. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been banking on his parliamentary majority, which is now looking dubious to say the least. Ultra-Orthodox partners still have his back, but there is visible tension from others. The religious nationalist coalition barely survived a no-confidence motion. The first motion failed to give out a decision. Then a second vote of 60 to 51 held the fort. The opposition is furious. Some have compared the reform to a hostile takeover by Hamas and Hezbollah. For hours now, Netanyahu has been locked in talks with members of his coalition. There have been recurring reports that he might halt his plans. However, there has been no announcement so far. Just until the weekend, he maintained his stance that the reforms will curb Supreme Court's too powerful role. Now, for the unversed, the proposal made by the Israeli government seeks to curb the judiciary's influence over public policy. It seeks to limit the Supreme Court's power to exercise the judicial review and grant the government control over judicial appointments by limiting the authority of legal advisors. In a nutshell, if this reform is adopted in Israel, it would grant the Knesset the power to override the Israeli Supreme Court's decisions. Now, Israel is standing at a defining moment. Irrespective of which turn it takes, this will go down in history. 500,000 people on the streets, government challenging the judiciary, and political uncertainty clouding the future of Israel. The big question is, what happens next? For Benjamin Netanyahu, is it really about the judiciary? Or is it about averting a legal battle that could end his career? For more on this, we are being joined by Seth J. Frenchon. He is the senior Middle East correspondent at Jerusalem Post. Welcome to the broadcast, sir.
Thank you.
Seth, is Prime Minister Netanyahu left with any other option but to halt the judicial reforms? His own party members are not in favor. The entire nation is protesting. What option is he left with now?
Yeah, I think it's probably maybe been his plan all along that he would not go through with all the reforms. So I think that halting them or putting them on the back burner or coming to some sort of compromise makes sense for him. And I think actually, if you look at his record over the last decade or so, there's a long history of him creating these kind of crises and then kind of backing down from them. And I think perhaps it's part of a kind of deal-making strategy in which you demand some huge amount that you don't even want, and actually what you really want is over here, and then you kind of pretend to go back on it so that you actually get what you actually want in the beginning.
Interesting point you make there. This is something that he has probably had in mind all along. Now, the protests seem to have gained more momentum, especially after Netanyahu fired his defense minister who asked for a halt on the reforms. I want to ask you, Seth, was this the tipping point for Netanyahu?
Well, I don't know if we know what the tipping point is yet, but I think that it's interesting that he fired Yoav Gallant, who was the defense minister, who's a very competent defense minister. I think that, again, it kind of compares to what he did in the past over the last 5 years, where he not only tried to take over kind of the defense and foreign ministries and run them himself, but also had, about 5 elections in Israel, which created this kind of endless chaos. So I think that, unfortunately, when Gallant gave him an opportunity to fire him, he quickly acted on it. I think that has sparked a lot more concerns and larger protests, and it's kind of, it's unclear exactly where he goes from here.
Thank you for joining in on the broadcast, Seth.